I was born in Aberdeen, Washington in September the 5th, 1924. And when we got out of the hospital, we went and living then for the years that we were in Aberdeen in the house that my grandfather had built for us so that we would have a place to live. And then when I was going to school and I got up into the junior high and I got into the 9th grade and I got the mumps. I was in bed, all puffed up and with the mumps, and the lady come from the school was checking on me to see why I wasn't in school that day. And so she rang the doorbell, and I got up out of bed and went to the door, and here I am. And she says, "Oh no." And I said, "Yep, got the mumps." And she says, "Will you get back in bed and don't you get up, because if you get up and move around, you're liable to get complications." And as it turned out, that one time getting up and out of bed was enough, and I did get the complications. Well, then I missed another 2 or 3 more weeks of school. And I just got back into school, and 3 days after I got back, I come down with the chicken pox. And so then that put me for a month and a half or more, and I had to come to the end of the 9th grade, and they told me, "Well, you go to high school next year, and but you'll have to come back every day and make up all this that you've missed." And I said, no, I don't think so. That does not sound like a good thing for me. So I decided to take the 9th grade over again completely. And my brother, who is 15 months younger than I, was then in the 9th grade with me, and we went all the way through and graduated from high school together. As it turned out, my father got a job down in Oregon, and we moved from Aberdeen when I was 17. Well, then when I was in Taft High School, and when the second year after I was 19 years old, in December, and I was still in high school, I got a draft notice to go into World War II. I went down to Toledo, where the county seat was at that time, and had told them that I would love to finish high school, then go into the service, because if I didn't, I probably would never come back and finish my schooling. So they said, well, that was fine, and they let me then go back, and I finished school on May the 28th, 1943. And I was drafted and had to report into Fort Lewis out of Tacoma, Washington. And I was sworn into the service then, into the old Army Air Force, on June the 8th, 1943. And at Fort Lewis, I was there for about 6 days, and they shipped me then to St. Louis, Missouri, and it was out of St. Louis is where I took my basic training then in the service. Well, after I completed my basic training, I was then told that I'd like to go to radio school and learn to operate the radios in airplanes. And they said, no, we have too many people in that school right now. We can't handle it. And I said, well, then I'll go to armament school. They said, no, we have too many people in armament. So we're going to ship you to Amarillo, Texas, to B-17 bomber school and learn how to take care and operate a B-17. Oh, well, great. And I was then in Amarillo, Texas, and graduated from the school there. And they shipped me from there to Las Vegas, where I went to gunnery school. Well, that way I was capable of being a flight engineer and also a gunner. So they shipped me then from there to Sioux City, Iowa, and from there we got our training together, and then we was sent back to Nebraska. In Nebraska, we picked up a B-17G, brand spanking new airplane, and was to take it overseas. Well, we flew it to Maine and landed, fueled up, and then took off and flew to Newfoundland and landed to stay overnight and fueled up, and we took off the next morning for the Azores Islands. And we flew down to the Azores, landed, fueled again, and flew to French Morocco, Marrakesh. And we stayed in Marrakesh then overnight and flew the next, fueled up, and flew to Tunis, Tunisia, and dropped down there, fueled up again, and took off and flew to Bari, Italy, where the 15th Air Force headquarters were. Well, we were then picked up there from Bari and was transported then to Foggia, Italy, where we were in the 32nd Bomb Squadron, 301st Bomb Group. Well, as we in our missions, we bombed over into Greece because the Germans were moving back out of there, and we was there to help them move out. And then we also bombed into Yugoslavia and northern Italy. The Germans were in Italy, and we bombed them there. We also then were going further north into Austria and Germany. We did a few little side ones off into the Czechoslovakia and Hungary, and in one long trip into Poland. It was on one of the missions that I was flying into Germany, into Blechheimer, Germany, is we had got, we were in the formation with the 15th Air Force, and at that time we were flying in a position called low left. And this was the position was there was a lead group and a low left group, a high right group, and a tail group. and we would go in over a target completely like that. Well, this day we got there early over Bleckheimer, Germany, and we broke radio silence and asked the general if we could go ahead, go in and drop our bombs. And he said, absolutely not. You circle and wait for us. So we did a complete 360-degree circle, coming back, and by that time the formation got in there, and we joined it and we started heading for the target. Well, during the time that we was making our 360-degree, the Germans were shooting anti-aircraft fire up into the air, and they would send one up, and they knew that it was going to explode at, say, 8,000 feet. And it might be black, or it could be green, it could be purple, it could be white, it could be red, almost any color at all. It would tell them what altitude that they were trying to figure out we were flying at. Well, it turned out that when we joined up with the 15th Air Force to make our run in over Bleckheimer, that they had our altitude, which was about 19,000 feet. And as we're heading over the target, they're shooting anti-aircraft fire from the ground, and they sent up one shell, and it hit into our bomb bay and exploded after dropping back down 6 or 8 feet. We're not certain of the footage. And it jammed the bombs in the bomb bay. We couldn't drop our bombs. Everybody else dropped theirs, but our particular group, we got hit hard enough that we couldn't drop our bombs. This was our own airplane itself. And we broke away then from the formation and heading away from the target. And here we are with 12 500-pound bombs jammed into our bomb bay. And so, starting at 19,000 feet, we're going down almost at an angle, and one engine had been completely shot out, and another engine is drawing only half power. The third engine is drawing full power, and the number one engine is in emergency rich to hold that side up. And we were flying along, and I got back into Bombay. I said, this morning, I was talking to the bombardier, this morning one of the guys that had been putting the bombs in said, hey, did you ever get your bombs jammed or anything so that they wouldn't drop? And I says, not that I know of, no. Well, he says, you know what to do in case something like that happens? I says, no, have no idea. And he said, well, let me show you. So we got into the Bombay. We were at the base in Italy. And he says, now, you got a screwdriver? Yeah. Well, he says, you see these screws along here that help holding those bombs in? He says, you can't tell it from looking at them, but that's what they're there for. Oh, so as we're going down, we got to get rid of those bombs. The bombardier says, I can't. They won't drop. And I said, well, I'll go into the Bombay and see if I can get rid of them. So I went in, had a parachute on, and the parachute was a chest chute. And I have my screwdriver in my left hand, and in my right hand I'm holding on to the rope that goes down through the bomb bay as something to hang on to when you're walking in a bomb bay. And I get all bent over double and get the screwdriver out to go into the screw, and my parachute comes up into my face and I can't see. Well, I've got to do something. So I had to come all the way back out, take my parachute off, and then go back into that open bomb bay at approximately 16,000 feet. And I got then bent over that lowest bomb, and I got the screwdriver and I hit that screw and turned it, and that bomb dropped away completely. But at the same time, when you lose 500-pound bomb, your airplane is going to jump a little bit. Oh, it jumped a whole lot. And I lost my footing then. I had one foot against the catwalk in the middle of the bomb bay, and one foot against the fuselage. Well, as we jumped, I jumped also, and I lost my footing. So I'm hanging by one hand then by the rope, and the screwdriver's still in my hand, fortunately. And I come back against the catwalk and pulled myself back up on top, and went back in and got on the radio to the bombardier, and I said, okay, we got rid of that one. Go ahead and let some others. He says, I tried. But he says, none of the others will go yet. Oh, wow. So I had to go back into the bomb bay the second time, that time, and went to the next bomb up, and without a parachute, of course, hanging on to the rope, one foot against the catwalk, one against the fuselage, and I got the screwdriver into the screw and give it a twist, and then the next bomb dropped away. Well, when that plane jumped that time, I didn't lose my footing at all because I was ready for that. So I went back in, the bombardier dropped all the other bombs, and some while later we were talking about that, and somebody said, well, I wonder what we hit with our bombs. And I said, well, it looked like the only thing we had down there was the potato patch. So we probably dropped our bombs in a potato patch. We don't know. Well, after we had dropped our bombs and were flying away, we're heading away from Bleckheimer, and so we're flying south, and we decided that we would probably, we weren't doing it that good, so because of the engines, the way they were, the shape they were in, and so we decided maybe we would head for Russia. And one of the other airplanes later, we heard later after we got back to the base, that they had decided, it had been hit and hit hard, and they decided to go to Switzerland and maybe come down there. But we're heading down because the engines weren't really doing too good, and after we got the bombs, and it did help a lot in that we weren't heading down as fast. The number one engine had been pulling emergency rich, and so I went back into the radio room where the turbo supercharging units were located for each engine. And as I looked, I could see that one engine, of course, had been hit and hit hard and was not fixable, and so I didn't bother with it. The number one engine was running on that emergency rich. It kept us going, basically. Number 2 engine was just flying at regular, because we couldn't get it up into emergency ridge. But anyway, number 3 engine then was flying only at half power. And so when I went into the radio room and I saw this unit for the turbo supercharger unit, and for the number 3 engine, had been hit by a piece of flak. And so I looked around and wow, there was a spare unit, or a spare electronic portion of the unit. And so I took the old unit out that had been hit and put this other unit in, not knowing that it was actually any good, because we didn't ever carry spares with us. And all of a sudden that engine came up then to full power. And wow, wasn't that great? Well, then we're flying on approximately 3 engines, but the number 1 engine then caught fire, and we had to turn it off and completely get away from that. So we're flying on 2 engines and a B-17, number 2 and number 3 engine, one on each side of the fuselage. And it did help us, but we continued to lose altitude. And we were heading, and we got over Czechoslovakia. We're still heading basically towards Russia. And we got down to 1,800 feet. And the pilot says, well, you got to bail out now, and because if you don't, we're going to have to ride it down. So none of us wanted to bail out. So we decided to ride the airplane all the way down. Well, as we're going down, we were looking for a road or anything that maybe we might be able to land on. And all we could see was a field, and it was covered with snow. And they said, well, there's nothing around it. So we said, well, let's head for that field. And as we were heading for that field, we were losing altitude. And the pilot says, well, get ready, we're going to have to go down. And he tried to put the ailerons on, but they had been hit and were useless. So the only way we could slow it down was to pull back on the engines, and finally we landed in this open field. Well, the field had been plowed during the regular season, but with this 1.5 foot of snow on top of it, when we hit that snow, we were going up and down over these ridges. And we're heading down the field, and I looked out the window, and the B-17 has 2 landing gear, and you have a tail wheel. And so your airplane is at an angle, and as we're going down the field, the pilot couldn't see out the window, but as I looked out the window, I could see there was a dip in the ground ahead of us, so quite a ways, and it looked like it had I-beams and H-beams in it. And so I told the pilot, hey, why would there be I-beams and H-beams out in there? So he stood up in his chair and looked out the window, and he says, oh, he says, that's one of those old tank traps. Oh, we're heading directly for that. And we don't have any brakes. And I told the co-pilot, I said, on that emergency handbrake there alongside of you, pump on that and see if there's any chance there's some emergency brake system. And he's just pumping and pumping. And I said, we can't go any further. Hit it. And the pilot hit the brake, and the right wheel momentarily caught, and we got into a one of the things where it had been plowed, and we turned and started heading back. Did a ground loop. Our wing went right over into the ground, floating on top of the ground, and we went back up the field then. Well, with no brakes, no ailerons, so the only way we could finally come to a stop was turn the engines off completely. We finally run out of speed and come to a stop. After we were getting ready and looking around and said, trying to figure out what to do, all of a sudden here come a whole bunch of people, and the farmers from the area evidently, and they had hose and scythes and pitchforks and all their instruments that way for doing their work, but no guns, because they weren't allowed to have them. So they came and was heading for the airplane when we got out of the airplane, and we all of us together, and we held our hands up like this as if, we're ready to give up. But these people were hollering, and they didn't. We feel that they would have probably got close enough. They might even want to kill us because they thought we were Germans. And by that time, there was a couple Russian soldiers had broke through them, and just before the Russians come, I went back into the airplane, and I was going to stop that group. So I put a round into the waist gun, a 50 caliber waist gun, and I triggered that off, maybe 50, 70 feet in front of them, into the ground. And they stopped then, and then the Russian soldiers come through there and came all the way up to us. And we had our hands up, and they took us prisoners then. And they put us into a house, and into all 10 of us, because not a one of us was wounded. And so all 10 of us crew people was put into this house, and they would then let us sleep or give us something to eat, not too much on eating, but at that time. And they'd let us sleep if we had to, because we were pretty darn tired. And they would let us sleep 20 minutes, and they would come in and say, "Raust," which is German for "get up," and or to that effect. And then they would want to start talking to us in their language, Russian, and we didn't understand any part of it at that time. And for 4 days, they kept us a prisoner. Well, then a KGB officer happened to drop by, or came by, and he heard us talking, and he come in and he says, "Who are you?" We said, "We're Americans." And he could speak English. Nobody else had been able to. And he says, "Oh, Amerikansky, Amerikansky." And we said, "Yes, yes." And so from that time on, they give us nothing but the best service, and kept us very well, fed us 3 times a day, and after about 18 days, we decided that was enough. We were going to head out and do something, so we started walking down the road towards we knew was Budapest. And that was, of course, a lot of miles, could have been as many as 600 to 1,000 miles. But anyway, we were going to start walking and go that way. And they came along in a truck and picked us up and carried us to Warsaw in Poland. We were in Warsaw for 5 days, or 5 hours, and we saw them blow up a hotel, and they had put dynamite and TNT around this hotel, which covered a full city block, and it was 7 stories high, and it was built out of brick. Well, when they blew that up, that all went up into the air like this, and then came down piece by piece and into a big hump. And they said later on, they told us that there was 300 Germans in that hotel, heavily armed, and they couldn't get them to give up or anything, so they decided just to blow up the hotel. In doing so, of course, they killed all 300 of the Germans. We then went from, after 5 hours in Warsaw, we went to Lvov, right on the border of the Ukraine and Poland. And we put up in a hotel there for 3-4 days. And then they said, well, we have a train, because they had been talking to us and asked us where did we want to go. We said we wanted to go to Moscow. And they said, Moscow. Oh, okay. And so they put us on a train, and we're heading back into the Ukraine country. And we're heading back. We got back as far as Kiev. And they took us out of the train at Kiev, kept us overnight in a school, and the next morning put us back on an airplane, or back onto the train. And as we were starting to move, they said, oh, by the way, you're not going to Moscow. The American consul said he didn't have any room for you. So he says, we're sending you to Poltava. And Poltava was right on the edge of the Black Sea, and had an ATC base there, Air Transport Command Base, where when the bombers out of Great Britain would come in and take long trips, and they would drop their bombs and then come over that far to that ATC base, load of bombs, gas up, and then would head for Italy. And they would go down towards Italy or that way, and in the northern part of Italy would drop their bombs where the Germans were stationed, and would then come into Italy and gas up and get some more bombs, and then head back up towards Germany and drop their bombs again somewhere in Germany, and then go back home to Great Britain, the British Isles. At Poltava, we had been, from the time that we had left our base in Italy till the time we got into Poltava at the ATC base, we hadn't had a bath. There was no water available to us at all that way. And so when we got there, they put us into a delousing chamber because it had been 40, I think it was about 48 or more days without anything. and we had picked up little bugs along the way somewhere, and we were in misery. Well, that is the most miserable thing I have ever been into in my life, is a delousing chamber. But anyway, they kept us for 4 days, and they had a DC-4 airplane, which is a transport, and they had replaced an engine that had been on that airplane. So we took that airplane and flew it to Tehran, Iran. Stayed overnight in Tehran, Iran, and left out of there at just after noon the next day, and took that airplane then, had it fueled up, of course, and flew it then to Cairo, Egypt, where we left that, and they put us on to another DC-4 that was heading back over towards Italy. Well, we flew to northern Africa, and then from there to Athens, Greece, and from Athens, Greece to Naples. Well, then we called the base, the 301st Bomb Group in Foggia from Naples, telling them we didn't have any transportation, but would like to come back to our base. And they said, we'll send a plane for you. So they sent a B-24 over and picked us up and took us back to our base in Foggia. And I never want to fly in another B-24.
Okay, honey.
When they picked us up at Naples in that B-24 and flew us back then to Foggia to our squadron in the 32nd Bomb Squadron. We then was welcomed by the major that was in charge of the base, of the 32nd base, and he welcomed us back in, and he says, well, what was wrong with the airplane? And we said, well, you know, after the Russians had taken such good care of us, and finally we went back out to the airplane and counted the holes that was in that airplane. And we had been hit by anti-aircraft fire, and there was 364 holes in that airplane. And I said, not one of the 10 of us was wounded, but it sure did raise heck with the airplane, because we weren't able to bring it all the way back then to our base. And we were there 4 or 5 days, and I had 11 more missions to fly to finish my tour of duty. So I started flying then, and of course I flew with a different crew every day, because the crew that I had flown over to Italy with, after the 8th time that I flew with them, I was then transferred up to a flight engineer, because I had been flying as a waist gunner. And so I was a flight engineer from that time on, and every day I would fly with a different crew, because they would be lacking, or the flight engineer that they had been wounded and needed replacement. And so I flew a different crew every day from that, after that 8th mission. And so I had 11 missions that I had to fly before I could complete my 35 tour. And I flew those 11 missions and made it in good shape, and then left Foggia, Italy, and went back to Naples. Well, at Naples, we were going to be shipped out by a ship, and the ship that was coming in to pick us up was USS Mariposa, and it would carry over 5,000 of us at a time. And we went then, started out from Naples, and we're heading up to Boston. Well, we got was 2 days at sea in the Atlantic Ocean when Germany surrendered. And I said, see there, that's why I was over here, was to get this war over with. And smart aleck kid. But anyway, we shouted, screamed, wow! And the captain come on of the ship, come on the air and said, now hear this, now hear this. He says, we are in German submarine territory. We do not know that the German submarines have been acquainted with the surrender. There was instant silence from that time on until we got to Boston in a couple, 3 days after that. Then I got onto they put me onto a train at Boston, and I stayed on that same train then. It was a troop train, and we went all the way then across the states, the northern part, and went to Fort Lewis, where I was given a 30-day leave, and I went home to my mother and father. They had moved back up from Oregon, back into our own home in Aberdeen, and so I was with them from that time on. And what had happened was that after I got back to the base in Italy, I wanted to call and let my mother know because I had been declared missing in action. And they said, no, you have to write a letter. Well, mail, it took 2 weeks for the mail to get from Foggia, Italy to Aberdeen before my mom knew that I wasn't missing anymore. And which was a blessing for her, of course, and Dad too. But so after we got back to Aberdeen, we lived then in our home until must have been a year and a half or more, maybe 2 years, and I went into work in the woods, falling and bucking trees and after I got word my brother Dick had been in contact with Morrison Knudsen out of Boise, Idaho, and they said they needed some workers over on Guam. And I says, on Guam? And my brother said, yeah, why don't you come with me and we'll go over to Guam. Oh, well, okay. So I left my job on the peninsula in Washington, up above Aberdeen, and we went to San Francisco, hired out, and went over to Guam, and with Morrison Knudsen, and helped build Anderson Air Force Base over on Guam in 1946 and 47, long in through that area. And then I quit and came back to the States and hired out with Pacific Island Engineers and went back to Guam and worked a year with them doing government work of taking different organizations around to islands in the Marianas Islands and showing the scrap metal left over around from the war, and they were to bid on getting that scrap metal back out. Well, there was a Japanese company that won the bid and went ahead and took all that, started getting all that scrap metal out. Well, I put in my year with them, and I came back, or was getting ready to come back to the States here. You know, my contract with the Pacific Island Engineers was up, and we had a typhoon, and it wrecked part of the Anderson Air Force Base that I had helped build. I had been doing a lot of purchasing and warehouse work and things like that. And so when I got back to the States here, I hired out with the company that got the contract to help rebuild Anderson Air Force Base. And so I came right back out again to Guam and started in purchasing, buying the supplies that was going to be necessary to put those living quarters and things back in at Anderson Air Force Base. Anyway, I came back out to Guam and was there for 4 months, and when they sent a representative out from the States, WWII Construction, and they said, we want to know what you're doing with the money that you've been putting in your pocket. I said, the what? And then they said, well, you've been stashing away money. And I says, well, I don't know anything about that. They said, oh, yes, you do. Where is it? And I said, well, I don't know. Okay, you're fired. And so then I had to pay my own way back from Guam to San Francisco. Well, at that same time, the head electrician had been with the WWII Construction Company for almost 30 years. And they fired him at the same time because they accused him of the same thing. And so we got back to the States and went down to Alhambra, and he went in to see the owner of the WWII Construction, and talked to them, and come out and says, well, I guess that's it. So I went back home, and after being home for 2 months, I got a letter from, and a letter of apology from WWII Construction, saying that they had found the money, and it was in a small bank in the Philippine Islands. And what had happened was that it was the project manager and the lady that was the head bookkeeper and office manager. They had been taking that extra money and putting it away in that bank. And so, but I had been buying in Japan and the Philippines and here in the United States, and that was why they thought that I was getting that money, but I wasn't. And then I got that letter from WWII Constructions of apology, and that they would, from then on, give me a good recommendation. Well, I went back to Boise, and I hired out, or in San Francisco, and anyway, I hired out and went out to French Morocco in Casablanca and Marrakesh and Sidi Slimane, and helped build, was starting to build airfields over there. It was at that time we were having a little problem. The United States was having problems with the Russians, and the Russians we couldn't use any of the air bases at Italy or any of the other countries because Russia had a hold on them. And so we were going to have to build airfields there in French Morocco for the B-52 bomber, which is a large, large bomber. So we then built one airfield at Casablanca and started another one at Marrakesh. And the one at Casablanca, I left after 1 year of work with them, and it was about 4 or 5 months after I left out there, somewhere in that neighborhood, France gave French Morocco back to the Moroccans. And the Moroccans said, you can't build airfields here. And so they had to quit building and leave Morocco. And one of the fellows that I had been working with, I met him about 4 or 5 months later, and he says, I saw the funniest thing you'll ever hear of. I says, oh? He says, you know that airfield that we built there in Casablanca? I said, yeah. It was a mile long, yeah. Oh, what was it, 3/4 of a mile wide? Yeah. And it was 12 feet deep out of concrete and steel. Yeah. Oh, it was a beautiful landing strip. And he says, I saw the funniest thing you'll ever see. He says, you know those Arabs and have those little donkeys, and they get up on top and ride them? Well, here was this Arab on his donkey, riding up and down that airstrip. And so I laughed and laughed. I think that's enough. I was notified that me being a World War II veteran, that it was going to be possible to take a trip back to Washington, D.C. to be able to see the World War II memorial that has been opened up back there. And so I contacted the local representative of South Willamette Valley honor flight. Got the paperwork made out and everything was in order, and I was to be shipped out May next year. As it turned out, they got an extra funding, and so they were able to take 2 airplanes, and we were then was able to go out now in October. I went up to Portland, stayed overnight, and they put us on the plane and flew us into Chicago. We got onto another airplane there at Chicago and flew down to Dulles in Virginia, just outside of Washington, D.C. Then we stayed at the Shiloh Inn. We were then fed there and taken care of overnight, and then we went by bus to see the different memorials that were in Washington, D.C. there. And one of the first ones was the World War II memorial, and there was 4 of us that we knew each other through our church here in Eugene. Chuck Roth, myself, Larry, I know him from the church, and Esley Schick. And so we all flew back there together. We're on different airplanes. Esley was on the same airplane as I was, but Larry and Chuck Roth were on the A plane. I was on the B plane. Then we would take 2 buses from Washington, D.C., from the Shiloh Inn, and we then went to the World War II Memorial. And we looked all around through there, and here's this great wall that has the stars on them. And each star represented 100 World War II veterans that died overseas during the war. But we also got to see that one of the poll, the state of Oregon, as one of the 52 states, and so I've taken a picture of that part of the memorial. We then went to several of the other different memorials, like the Vietnamese War and the Korean War, and here was this big statue of Iwo Jima, and there was also, in the Korean War, there was a whole bunch of individual statues in a open field. They represented the Korean War. And after I spent all day long there, I did get to see my granddaughter, Catherine, who lives back there in Washington, D.C. And I got to see her for only about 5-6 minutes. But I did get to see also a fellow that I grew up with in Aberdeen, Washington. He lived 2 houses down from where I lived, and we come together. His name was Wilbert Young, and Willie and I were able to put in as much as 15 or 20 minutes together, and we hadn't seen each other in over 60 years. So I did not recognize him right off the bat, but he had seen my picture that was printed in the Aberdeen World, and his brother Ernie had sent that picture back to him, so he was able to pick me out real easy. And so we spent a good 20 minutes together before Catherine got there, and we were there then together. We come back late that evening then to Shiloh Inn, stayed overnight, and the next day we took an airplane and headed back towards Chicago, and from Chicago to Portland. And but then came back to Eugene from there.
All right, Joe, did you get a flag when you were back there too?
Can I move?
No, you're fine.
Yes, I got this flag, and it was flown at the Capitol of Washington, D.C. This was given to us so that we could carry all the items that was given to us, and we'd put it on our back. In December, still in high school, I got a draft notice, and I was drafted and had to report into Fort Lewis out of Tacoma, Washington. And it was out of St. Louis is where I took my basic training then in the service. So they shipped me then from there to Sioux City, Iowa. And from there, we got our training together. We picked up a B-17G in Nebraska and was to take it overseas. We bombed over into Greece because the Germans were moving back out of there, and we was there to help them move out. Well, this day we got there early over Bleckheimer, Germany. As we're heading over the target, they're shooting anti-aircraft fire from the ground, sent up one shell, and it hit into our bomb bay and exploded. We couldn't drop our bombs. And my parachute comes up into my face. I hit that screw and turned it, and that bomb dropped away completely. When you lose 500-pound bomb, your airplane is going to jump a little bit. Oh, it jumped a whole lot. So I'm hanging by one hand and by the rope. Probably dropped their bombs in a potato patch. So we're flying on two engines, and finally we landed in this open field. He says that's one of those old tank traps. They took us prisoners then. And they would come in and say, "Rust. Who are you?" We said, "We're Americans." "Amerikansky, Amerikansky." We started walking down the road towards Budapest. They came along in a truck and picked us up. We went to Lvov, right on the border of the Ukraine. We're sending you to Poltava. They put us into a delousing chamber. We had picked up little bugs along the way somewhere. So we took that airplane and flew it to Tehran, Iran. And took that airplane then, flew it then to Cairo, Egypt. Well, we flew to northern Africa, and then from there to Athens, Greece, and from Athens, Greece to Naples. So they sent a B-24 and picked us up and took us back to our base in Foggia. I never want to fly in another B-24. What was wrong with the airplane? There was 364 holes in that airplane. Not one of the 10 of us was wounded. I had 11 more missions to fly to finish my tour of duty. I was then transferred up to a flight engineer. I flew those 11 missions and made it in good shape. We were going to be shipped out by a USS Mariposa from Naples to Boston. It was 2 days at sea in the Atlantic Ocean when Germany surrendered. And I said, see there, that's why I was over here, was to get this war over with. Smart aleck kid. Then I got onto a troop train at Boston to Fort Lewis. And I went home to my mother and father. They had moved back up from Oregon, back into our own home in Aberdeen. So I was with them from that time on.